The Cherry Tree. Read and enjoy. Let us read the story of a boy and his grandfather who plant a cherry tree and take care of it. One day, when Rahul was 6, he walked at the Mussoorie bazaar eating cherries. They were a little sweet, a little sour, small, bright red cherries that had come all the way from the Kashmir Valley. Here in the Himalayan foothills where Rahul lived, there were not many fruit trees. The soil was stony, and the dry cold wind stunted the growth of most plants. But on the more sheltered slopes there were forests of oak and deodar. Rahul lived with his grandfather on the outskirts of Mussoorie, just where the forest began. Grandfather was a retired forest ranger. He had a little cottage outside the town. Rahul was on his way to home from school when he bought the cherries. He paid 50 paisa for the bunch. It took him about half an hour to walk home, and by the time he reached the cottage, there were only 3 cherries left. "Have a cherry, grandfather," he said, as soon as he saw grandfather in the garden. Grandfather took 1 cherry and Rahul promptly ate the other 2. He kept the last seed in his mouth for some time, rolling it round and round on his tongue until all the tang had gone. Then he placed the seed on the palm of his hand and studied it. "Are cherry seeds lucky?" asked Rahul. "Of course," said grandfather. "Nothing is lucky if you put it away. If you want luck, you must put it to some use." "What can I do with the seed?" asked Rahul. "Plant it," replied grandfather. So Rahul found a small spade and began to dig up a flower bed. "Hey, not there," said grandfather. "I've sown mustard seeds in that bed. Plant it in that shady corner, where it won't be disturbed." Rahul went to a corner of the garden where the earth was soft and yielding. He did not have to dig. He pressed the seed into the soil with his thumb and it went right in. Then he had his lunch and ran off to play cricket with his friends and forgot all about the cherry seed. When it was winter in the hills, a cold wind blew down from the snows and went woo-woo-woo in the deodar trees, and the garden was dry and bare. In the evenings grandfather and Rahul sat over a charcoal fire, and grandfather told Rahul stories about people who turned into animals and ghosts who lived in trees, and beans that jumped, and stones that wept, and in turn Rahul would read news to him from the newspaper, as grandfather's eyesight being rather weak. Rahul found the newspaper very dull, especially after the stories, but grandfather wanted all the news. They knew it was spring when the wild duck flew north again, to Siberia. Early in the morning, when he got up to chop wood and light a fire, Rahul saw the V-shaped formation streaming northwards and heard the calls of birds clearly through the thin mountain air. One morning in the garden he bent to pick up what he thought was a small twig and found to his surprise that it was well rooted. He stared at it for a moment, then ran to fetch grandfather, calling, "Dada, come and look, the cherry tree has come up." "What cherry tree?" asked grandfather, who had forgotten about it. "The seed we planted last year. Look, it's come up," said Rahul. Rahul went down on his haunches, while grandfather bent almost double and peered down at the tiny tree. It was about 4 inches high. "Yes, it's a cherry tree," said grandfather. "You should water it now and then." Rahul ran indoors and came back with a bucket of water. "Don't drown it," said grandfather. Rahul gave it a sprinkling and circled it with pebbles. "What are the pebbles for?" asked grandfather. "For privacy," said Rahul. He looked at the tree every morning but it did not seem to be growing very fast. So he stopped looking at it, except quickly, out of the corner of his eye. After a week or 2, when he allowed himself to look at it properly, he found that it had grown, at least an inch. That year the monsoon rains came early and Rahul plodded to and from school in raincoat and gumboots. Ferns sprang from the trunks of trees, strange-looking lilies came up in the long grass, and even when it wasn't raining the trees dripped and mist came curling up the valley. The cherry tree grew quickly in this season. It was about 2 feet high when a goat entered the garden and ate all the leaves. Only the main stem and 2 thin branches remained. "Never mind," said grandfather, seeing that Rahul was upset. "It will grow again, cherry trees are tough." Towards the end of the rainy season new leaves appeared on the tree. Then a woman cutting the grass cut the cherry tree into 2. When grandfather saw what had happened, he went after the woman and scolded her, but the damage could not be repaired. "Maybe it will die now," said Rahul. "Maybe," said grandfather. But the cherry tree had no intention of dying. By the time summer came round again, it had sent several new shoots with tender green leaves. Rahul had grown taller too. He was 8 now, a sturdy boy with curly black hair and deep black eyes. Blackberry, grandfather called him. That monsoon Rahul went home to his village, to help his father and mother with the planting and plowing and sowing. He was thinner but stronger when he came back to his grandfather's house at the end of the rains, to find that the cherry tree had grown another foot. It was now up to his chest. Even when there was rain, Rahul would sometimes water the tree. He wanted it to know that he was there. One day he found a bright green praying mantis perched on a branch, peering at him with bulging eyes. Rahul let it remain there. It was the cherry tree's first visitor. The next visitor was a hairy caterpillar, who started making a meal of the leaves. Rahul removed it quickly and dropped it on a heap of dry leaves. "Come back when you are a butterfly," he said. Winter came early. The cherry tree bent low with a weight of snow. Field mice sought shelter in the roof of the cottage. The road from the valley was blocked, and for several days there was no newspaper, and this made grandfather quite grumpy. His stories began to have unhappy endings. In February, it was Rahul's birthday. He was 9, and the tree was 4, but almost as tall as Rahul. One morning, when the sun came out, grandfather came into the garden. "Let some warmth get into my bones," he said. He stopped in front of the cherry tree, stared at it for a few moments and then called out, "Rahul, come and look. Come quickly before it falls." Rahul and grandfather gazed at the tree as though it had performed a miracle. There was a pale pink blossom at the end of a branch. The following year there were more blossoms, and suddenly the tree was taller than Rahul, even though it was less than half his age. Then it was taller than grandfather, who was older than some of the oak trees. But Rahul had grown too. He could run and jump and climb trees as well as most boys, and he read a lot of books, although he still liked listening grandfather's tales. In the cherry tree, bees came to feed on the nectar in the blossoms, and tiny birds pecked at the blossoms and broke them off. But the tree kept blossoming right through the spring, and there were always more blossoms than birds. That summer there were small cherries on the tree. Rahul tasted one and spat it out. "It's too sour," he said. "They'll be better next year," said grandfather. But the birds liked them, especially the bigger birds, such as the bulbuls and scarlet miniwets, and they flitted in and out of the foliage, feasting on the cherries. On a warm sunny afternoon, when even the bees looked sleepy, Rahul was looking for grandfather without finding him in any of his favorite places around the house. Then he looked out of the bedroom window and saw grandfather reclining on a cane chair under the cherry tree. "There is just the right amount of shade here," said grandfather, "and I like looking at the leaves." "They're pretty leaves," said Rahul. "They are always ready to dance, if there's a breeze." After grandfather had come indoors, Rahul went into the garden and lay down on the grass beneath the tree. He gazed up through the leaves at the great blue sky, and turning on his side, he could see the mountains riding away into the clouds. He was still lying beneath the tree when the evening shadows crept across the garden. Grandfather came back and sat down beside the Rahul, and they waited in silence until it was dark. "There are so many trees in the forest," said Rahul. "What's so special about this tree? Why do we like it so much?" "We planted it ourselves," said Grandfather. "That's why it's special." "Just one small seed," said Rahul, and he touched the smooth bark of the tree that had grown. He ran his hand along the trunk of the tree and put his finger to the tip of a leaf. "I wonder," he whispered. "Is this what it feels to be God?"